Hello, Booktube. We're at part 3 of our September Q&A, maybe the first of a couple of September Q&As, and we are up to Bas van Dijk. Wonderful channel, Steve. Have you ever read any books by... Is my memory faulty, or is this our first has Steve read it question? That should be in the ground rules, shouldn't it? This is a has Steve read question. In my life, typically, I have gone ballistic at has Steve read questions at the old bookstore when Deb and I would be at the information desk, and somebody, a new employee, would say, "Have you ever read?" Deb would say, "Oh no, don't ask him, have you ever read? Ask him what he thinks of." Because it was going to elicit a diatribe, because I read 150 pages an hour for an average of 9 or 10 hours every day, and I have for the last 275 years. So let's see who you're going to ask about. Dutch authors Harry Mulisch and W.F. Hermans. All right, well, Hermans maybe you could get away with, but Mulisch is a star in English as well. I have read both these authors, yes, and I like them both. Mulisch especially. I think he's fantastic. Let's move on, shall we? Maximus Stetich says, do you recommend any particular biographies for Plato and Aristotle? Nope. Never read one for either one of them that was any good. They're mostly just speculation, plaster of Paris, that sort of thing. The best possible thing you can do for a biographical sketch would be to get a really good English language translation of their work. Penguin Classic on Plato, the Everyman's Classic, the big volume of Everyman's Classic for Aristotle, and just carefully read the biography, maybe read up on Wikipedia, but there isn't enough. There isn't enough specifically on individuals to write biographies of either one of them. So learn what we know about them, learn what ancient sources made up about them, but don't bother with a biography. I don't even know of any biographies that you could bother with. Michael Moore says, a question from England. I know you watch Sean D. Stanfast and Eric Carl Anderson. What other English booktubers do you watch regularly, and which do you recommend? Well, I love Sean's channel. I love Eric's channel. I think they're both great. And I watch, of course, Katie at Books and Things. Katie Lumsden, who's has been a staple of my BookTube watching as long as I've been watching BookTube. But a lot of BookTube channels I do watch, but I can't recommend. A lot of them are the Fairy Lights, Tea Cozy type of group-approved read think that I argue against. I don't like it at all. A lot of the British booktube channels that I'm thinking of have been informally termed by me and others over the years as the British Mafia, because all seem to know each other and they never stray out of lockstep with each other, and that bothers me. That's anti-reading. Not to mention the fact that quite a few of them went on the warpath against me for virtually no provocation 5 years ago. Not that I'm holding a grudge or anything, but I watch their channels. I do still watch their channels. These are mega channels, 60, 70, 80, 100,000 subscribers. I watch their channels. It's just, it's not hate watching, because there's a part of me that wishes they would come back over to the good side. But it's frustrating, definitely. It's frustrate watch, because it's a very rounded, sanded down, mealy mouthed, anodyne version of reading. There's nothing at all like the kind of spirited, jagged disagreement that we do here and still stay friends. There's nothing like that at all. Or picture Noah at Everyone Who Reads Must Converse. He does a Friday live stream. You go on that live stream. I don't advise it, because if it gets too crowded, it won't be any fun anymore. But you go on that live stream, you're going to find people who violently disagree with each other about a whole bunch of things. I disagree with Noah on virtually what time of day it is. And yet, the thing we have mastered mostly in this little corner of BookTube is the ability to just laugh and spiritedly disagree, and maybe even subtly take recommendations while you're telling somebody that the thing you're making a mental note of is junk. That kind of reading discussion, I think, is quintessentially adult. It's multifaceted. There's a stupid ego in the game. It's not sponsored, and there's no right think. I tremendously value that, and I don't get that on a lot of British booktube channels. Kit's World, yes, absolutely. There are plenty that I do, but the bigger booktube channels are mostly British, and it's gone from those channels completely. They are essentially wholly owned subdivisions of the PR department of whatever publisher is sending them books. You have seen on this channel over the years that somebody can get plenty of books from publishers and not be like that. It works better for everybody involved, including the publisher. Right? You are the people who are going to buy the books that those publishers are sending. It's not me. I'm not going to buy the books. You are. And how much more valuable is it for you? How much more likely are you to buy a book sent by a publisher if I have not just smilingly loved every single thing I've ever got? If instead something jumps out, it's going to jump out for you too. It works to the benefit of everybody. But there's nothing like that on those channels. The Fairylight channels, there's nothing like that on their channels. There's an approved channel of thinking, and that's it. So when it comes to British booktube channels, not usually, not a lot. Let's see here. Vinye Ailavarapu? Boy, I'd love to hear you say that name. I bet it's as beautiful as a song. If or when BBC Radio invited you to their Desert Island Disc show, they're never going to do it. I know that a lot of you would like it if I became this kind of celebrity. I think a few of you have emailed and said the reason why you would like it if I became that kind of genuine celebrity instead of an unknown weirdo on BookTube would be because you know I wouldn't change. And so it would be like a friend of yours became a celebrity. That would be entirely true. I am a washboard ab, bee-sting lip, wavy, black-haired, come-hither glance, A-frame shoulder, smoldering YouTube super hottie in his 20s. So why would I need to change? The world is already my oyster. I wouldn't, no matter what happened. If BBC did that, if BBC not only asked me out to Desert Island Disc, but said, we'd like to give you a regular Zoom book chat on our main channel once a week, so that 30 million people can watch you, I would gladly do that. Instead, you'll notice they do that to the bigger British booktubers that I was talking about, because they're safe, because they're not going to offend anybody. Who wants to read or hear book opinions like that? I am of a different school of book reaction, and so I'm never going to get that invitation. But if I did, you would be right in saying that I would not change. I might have to wear pants, but if it were Zoom chat, no. But anyway, what was your question? Oh, what would be your 8 favorite? The Desert Island Disc, they ask you your 8 favorite tracks, your 8 favorite books, and a luxury item. And I don't have a ready-made list like that. I don't think any of the contestants on any of the guests on Desert Island Disc do either. I think they make them up right before the show. I don't have any such thing. If I could have, I mean, the idea here is that you'll be some sort of fusty, leather elbow-patched library inhabitant, when really what I want is for the luxury item to be a Wi-Fi connected iPad, in which case I wouldn't have to pick my tracks, I wouldn't have to pick my books, I would have the infinitude and precious little reason to leave the desert island, except the desert island would have to have dogs. I have no interest in being on an island with no dogs. I've done that before. I've gone to islands where no one lives, where my dogs were the first dogs that ever set foot there. Things are the size of a football field. A lot of those things, those little islands, the size of a football field or maybe 2 football fields, plenty of vegetation, solid rocks, so they're not going to wash away when waves rise, but also a clear water spring. So someone could live there. I've pulled up on many, many islands like that in the world. There are many, many islands like that. I didn't stay, though. There's no food. But anyway, I guess if you fish, you could live there. I never, in all the places that I did that, where I would occasionally, a lot of times those islands weren't habitable. There were trees, but there was no fresh water source that was available to the ground. The trees' roots kept them alive. But sometimes there was a fresh water supply. There was a fresh spring up on a hill somewhere. And I never encountered an island like that where I saw any hint that humans had lived there. Anyway, so I don't have an answer here. My answer would be a Wi-Fi connected iPad. Let's see here. Peter Gardner says, hi Steve, what are your thoughts on George Peretz Life, a User's Manual? It stinks. Caleb Bouchard says, hi Steve, have you read anything by Michel Houellebecq? Another have you read question. This whole Q&A is going to heck in a handbasket. Of course I have read Houellebecq. If so, what are your impressions of his worldview? He stinks. His worldview, his body, and also his writing. Do you have a favorite novel from him? No, they all stink. They're not worth your time. You'd be better off reading the dirty limericks that were carved into the wood in a men's room of your favorite restaurant than anything that Houellebecq ever wrote. He's junk. William Fett says, face reality, 12K is coming. No. I have already stipulated this is a 12-nay channel. It is absolutely ridiculous to think of this channel getting to 12,000 subscribers. For Pete's sake, pay attention to this video and the others in this Q&A series. What is there to get this to 12K? There's nothing interesting here at all. 12K is not coming. We will not be reaching 12K on this channel. Okay? But you have questions, yes? What do you think of the No Fear Shakespeare series and Barron's Simply Shakespeare? I've found them very helpful. They're intensely helpful for two things. One, understanding Shakespeare. They're great at helping you to understand Shakespeare. And two, ferreting out snobs. They're really good at that as well. Really good. When I used to sell them at bookstores, for instance, invariably there would be we invariably had on staff at least 2 or 3 condescending a-holes. And a customer would come up and ask for No Fear Shakespeare, and they'd say, well, we have real Shakespeare too, until I could get to them. If I saw that the question was going to them, if I couldn't intercede, if I had a question of my own at the moment, then I would get to them when it was all over and say, don't ever let me hear you say something like that to a customer again. If you're going to talk to a customer that way, make sure it's out of my hearing. Because if you do that in my hearing, again, I'm going to mock you in front of that customer. And I'm much better at it than you are. And don't say that you're going to go to management and say he's mocking me. You don't get any defense from management for being mean to customers. Okay? You don't have a right to do that without being mocked by someone else. If you get to mock customers, I get to mock you. So don't do it again. And don't tell me that I'm not management. I'm not talking about management. If you do it again, I'll exact a punishment right there in front of the customer. I'll have the whole crowd of people at this desk laughing at you. So don't do it again. If your own sense of decency doesn't stop you, then your own ego ought to stop you. But it wasn't just those employees. It was also some customers. No Fear Shakespeare and things like it help you to sniff out snobs. Anybody who says that they are just inherently a bad idea is a snob, and you should mock them. Or convert them, or both. Let's see here. Jordan Parsons says, can you please recommend a good biography of William Tyndale? David Daniel wrote a book years ago that was terrific. Oh, boy. Wish I had a copy of that book. The Brattle will provide. Well, I haven't seen it in probably 15 years. It's terrific, though. Daniel is the author's last name. It's an amazing biography. It wouldn't matter who it was. Great biographies are like that, but it's a fascinating life to read about. But that's the one I recommend. David Daniel. And then you had another question, yes? Also, do you know of any good books on the composition of the King James Bible? There have been quite a few. There are quite a few. I'd recommend God's Secretaries by Adam Nicholson. Very readable. It's a fascinating, fascinating story. Especially when you consider that it's not just a book for 100 million Americans. It's not just a book. 100 million Americans think that God spoke it that way. They have no idea. Not only that any ecumenical councils existed centuries ago and that men decided which books would be in that Bible that they're talking about, but also they don't have any idea that this was a translation and that it was just guys who got together and compared notes or didn't compare notes in order to figure out how to translate key words. Like, for instance, virgin, as opposed to young girl, the famous example, but there are plenty of others. 100 million Americans believe that it is that not only that the Bible is the direct word of God, but that the King James Bible is the direct word of God. They have no conception whatsoever that it was an editorial project. None whatsoever. So it's a fascinating subject. I would recommend Nicholson's book, but there are plenty of others that are good. Let's see here. Corey Black says, number 1, what is your favorite piece of writing that was written by a founding father? I believe, since I'm in Boston, I'm contractually obligated to say the autobiography of Ben Franklin. And number 2, what book would you recommend about France in the American Revolution? There was a book comparatively recently called Brothers in Arms by Lawrence Ferrero, I want to say. Ferrero, I think, was the last name. Brothers in Arms was the name of the book. It was all about that subject, an utterly fascinating subject that we would not have won. The rebels would not have won the revolution without the French. It just would not have happened. They were on the edge of being destroyed. Despite certain recent revisionist histories, they were on the edge of being destroyed. And it was France that saved them. Let's see here. Anna on the Shelves says some quick questions. Number 1, have you watched the new Green Knight movie? I have not. Not the whole thing. I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I really need just sitting down, shutting everything off, and just watching it with exclusive attention. I have not done. Number 2, you have told us about your extensive travel, and we all know that you have walked everywhere that is not Australia. Pretty sure there is still Steve fingerprints somewhere on my home. If it's not Australia, if it's not the Australian archipelago, I guarantee you I have been not only in your town, but in your immediate area. I guarantee that. Every inch of the world, other than Australia. But how about the ocean? Yes, I've spent more time on the Earth's oceans than I have on Earth land. Huge amounts of time. You mentioned that you traveled by boat, yes. But have you ever went on dives or explored the underwater world? Good Lord, are you insane? Oh, is that what you mean? No. I've not gone diving in the ocean. No, I have not done that. Because if anything goes wrong with your air supply, you die before you can get to the surface. And also, every inch of Earth's oceans is occupied by sharks, most of whom are larger than 6 feet, and all of whom have very sharp teeth. It's insane. Insane. When I see YouTube footage of people on vacation, in the Indian Ocean or the Caribbean or wherever, and they just dive off the edge of their boat, or the coast of Italy or wherever, they just dive into the crystal clear turquoise water. Oh, isn't this great? They're splashing around. Unbelievable. Just unbelievable. There are sharks within 10 feet of where you are. There are sharks that know you just hit the water. There must be unuploaded home video vacation footage of people being bitten or killed by sharks in such circumstances. There must be. I'd be willing to bet there's an equal amount of footage to the footage that doesn't show that. I would never swim in the ocean. In the surf, maybe, although sharks are there too. No, I would never swim in the ocean. I'm not going to go on a dive. Good Lord. And finally, is your canine superpower the wit from Robin Hobb's The Realm of the Elderlings? No. No. I don't have a canine superpower. It's not mystication. It's communication. I can talk with them. I just happen to be the only 2-legged creature on Earth who can. That's all. It just looks strange. Some of the things that I can do if we're out on a dog walk together with a dog I've never met before will strike you as genuinely weird. Genuinely stop everything and stare weird. But it's not. It's not at all. Let's see here. Shelley Swearingen says, how do you keep track of all the books you have read? I've kept so many book journals over the years, book inventories ongoing over the years. I've dedicated individual books to it. Once upon a time, I had a spreadsheet that somebody made me on Booktube, sent me an idiot-proof spreadsheet that I used forever and ever until I realized I was never consulting it. And I also realized that all those books, all those inventories, I was never consulting. I was never going back to them. It was just a pure nervous tick. It was just a pure waste of time. So now, I know this isn't going to be helpful at all. I do it all by memory. And you've seen on this channel, sometimes my memory fails me. Sometimes I'll think, what was the name of that book? Or do I have a copy of this book? But usually it doesn't. It's a muscle. Like anything else, the more you use it, the stronger it gets. Usually it doesn't fail me. And so a number of you have commented over the years that I seem to have a weirdly extensive memory of the things I read. Well, it's a muscle. To the extent that it's true, it's a muscle that I have just developed over time. Same thing with what I have, same thing with what's in a book. It's mostly just memory now. I just realized that the bean is being extra cute, so none of you may be listening to me at all. Let's just continue on here. Lisa Garrity says, there are many videos regarding the Brattle, and you have mentioned the Strand a few times. What about bookstores on the other coast? The other coast. Have you visited, and what did you think of Powell's in Portland, City Lights in San Francisco, the last bookstore in Los Angeles? I will benevolently overlook the have you visited part. I like them. Of course I like them. They're bookstore meccas. They're book lover meccas. They just don't hold a candle to my own, to either the Strand or particularly the Brattle Bookshop. And let's see here. And did you visit the Livraria Lelo when you were in Portugal? There are cathedrals that are less magnificent. I did visit it many times, and I do agree that it is magnificent. I don't particularly like magnificence in my bookstores, but I agree. Luke and Jennifer Higgins have a barrage of questions. Let's see. Number 1, who's your favorite actor? What actor's portrayal of Sherlock Holmes is your favorite, and why? That would be Jeremy Brett. His is the most uncompromising. His is the one that says, this is the Holmes that I encounter in the stories and novels, not the Holmes that I encountered on the screen when I was a child or on stage. It's the most uncompromising. It's the Holmes you could actually meet. He's He's not a freak, but he is genuinely impressive, and he is definitely a creature of his time. I like that Holmes better, and Brett is brilliant, of course. Anyway, so let's see here. Question number 2. Do you enjoy the science fiction novels of Stephen Baxter? I do, very much so. I, Luke, have read his sequels to The War of the Worlds as well as The Time Machine and love them both. Yeah, they're fantastic. His sequel to The War of the Worlds is just a hoot. Endlessly fun. And number 3, Amelia. I knew Amelia was going to commit to this. What is my Amelia doing lately? What is her question? She has her heart set on becoming a scientist, but hates math. My heart goes out to you. She is leaning towards focusing on animals because, as you well know, animals, quote, hate math too. Animals don't hate math. They just don't know it exists. Her parents have explained how math and science go hand in hand, but she is not buying it. Oh, Amelia. In this, as in so many other things, your parents are right. Could you speak on this to help promote math a bit, please? We know it's a difficult request, by the way. What is this? Because I'm no fan of math, but I don't have to be, keep in mind. Because I deal in words. I deal in language. I don't deal in science. You should go into science. We need more people into science. But the thing you have to understand, I don't have to promote math to tell you that you have to do it. If you wanted to live and work in France, you would not say, what was it again? It would not matter to you whether you hate learning French. You would learn it. You would immediately know that you have to know French in order to live and work in France. Math is the language of science. It's the exact same thing. There is no science career without knowing math. You have to get proficient in it. You don't have to love it, but you have to know how to do it. Otherwise, it's not even a question of you'll be bad at whatever field of science you go into. You won't get there. It's a requirement. You can't get into, for instance, you mentioned serving animals. That's a great idea. Of course, I love that idea, but that will be a veterinary capacity, right? Some kind of veterinary medicine. In order to do that, you have to do biochemistry. And in order to do biochemistry, you have to do math. Math is the basic language of science. So even though you hate it, and I acknowledge that because I hate it too, if you want a field of study, you want to make that a part of your life, then you have to just get over it. That's all. A lesson that perhaps your parents might be too kind to impart to you, but I can tell it to you straight. Adult life is composed in part of doing things that you don't want to do in order to get the result that doing those things will get you. That is part of adult life. I would also argue that it's part of young life too. I think you already know that. I think you're already familiar with the experience of doing something you don't want to do in order to get a result that you do want to do. Well, getting good at math is a perfect example of that if you want to go into any field of science. Something you don't want to do that will get you to where you want to be. Once you are in a veterinary capacity of some kind, working with animals, you won't have to do math anymore, but it's the way to get there, and it's the only way to get there. So I would say grumble all you like, but bear down and get good at math. Get used to it. Know your way around it, and just try to get through it. That's all. Just get through it. Keep the destination in mind. That will work. Let's see here. How are we doing for time? Oh, we're fine. Curio says, have you read the Malazan Book of the Fallen series? I have, yes. If you have, are they as impenetrable and hard to understand as people make them out to be? No, they're not. They're a little overcomplicated. That's the author's fault, not the fans. They're a little overcomplicated, but there's at least an hour's worth of great reading in every single volume. And that's pretty good. That's a pretty good track record for an author who's writing such an interminable story. It shouldn't be. The Malazan Book of the Fallen should have been a trilogy. All ongoing science fiction and fantasy series should be trilogies. There isn't enough material to keep it going. There's no warrant internally, narratively. But even so, they're not impenetrable. No, not at all. That's their billing. I think they'd like to be the cool goth kid of fantasy, but they aren't impenetrable. You'll be fine. Teresa McGovern says, Steve, if you were 25 again, would you have chosen an editor's job in a big/small publishing house or the profession you have now? I realize you're only 28, but still, there was a long time in my life where I would have answered yes. I would have said absolutely. If Anchor or Mariner or Viking, God help us, were to call me and say, we've got an entry-level editor's position, we'd love to hire from within, you could be here a long time. There were many, many years of my life where I would have said, absolutely, sign me up. But not anymore. You're dealing with Viking, if let's say it was Viking, you're dealing with Viking's line of books. And you're cheerleading even the pieces of crap. And you're not dealing with anybody else's lines of books, and you can't say anything negative about anything. Not Norton books or Viking books because they're your own list, and not anybody else's list because it's unprofessional. I would much rather be in the position that I'm in now. The one change that I would want now in terms of big/little would maybe be to have a very big platform in the profession where I'm in now. I am just a freelance book reviewer and a book section editor for the world's smallest book section, the world's smallest dedicated print newspaper, full-color book section. I'm immensely proud of Big Canoe News, don't get me wrong. The October issue is going to knock your socks off, but it's tiny. It reaches hardly any. The number of people that read it would fit in Hyde Cottage. Whereas I sometimes think, what if a much bigger version of that? What if, for instance, I had a national column or a national book review or a berth at some really big venue where I could reach 200,000 people? Maybe and where it was really gainfully compensated and had, health insurance and all that sort of stuff. Wouldn't that be enticing? And maybe it would be. Maybe it would be. But the 21st century has made me very leery about advancements like that because I can't help but think it would come with strings. I have no masters now. That's no small thing. I'm not sure that I would take a bigger sway like that if it came with masters, and I don't see how it wouldn't. If there is anybody out there listening who has such an offer to make, we can talk, but I don't think so. And on most days, my sense of fairness would say, if somebody came to me with an offer like that, my sense of fairness would say, well, this is exactly what I'm talking about. It is exactly what I said would really tempt me. But now that I actually have an offer in my inbox, I can think of 3 or 4 people that deserve it more, that might like it more. Then I'll be fine. I can get along with being a junkyard freelancer. But I'm not sure that I would take it anyway if it could go to somebody else. I don't know. That was a horribly convoluted answer to your question. Let's just do one more here. Delere B, D-L-E-R-E, says, one last question, and I apologize if you already talked about this. Don't worry about if we've already talked about it. I have 4,000 videos. I've done a million Q&As. There's bound to be duplication. I'm not going to hold it against anybody. I'm certainly not going to be one of these hair-tossing prima donnas who do Q&As and say, oh, look, guys, I've heard this before. Look, I'm going to group a bunch of these questions together because they're not interesting enough on their own. Just hit unsubscribe to douche canoes like those. So what is your question? Your boring question. What do you think of T.S. Eliot? Okay, T.S. Eliot has come up before. If I had to put my money on a guess, I'd say you dislike him, at least his poetry, with some passion. I like his poetry a little more every time I revisit it. Some of it, anyway. He is one of those that rotating crew of authors where I originally started just by not liking anything, and I'm gradually revisiting them because I think there might be something there. And poetry, a lot of the names on that list are poets. I've been revisiting Auden to my intense gratification. He is so much better every time I revisit him. And I have a feeling that Wallace Stevens is the same way. He's up for next year. But T.S. Eliot too, and of course, reading about Eliot, I just love. What's the matter, baby? What you doing? You have jumped down from that couch a million times. Why would you be worried about how it will go? Why would you worry about that? It's a couch. You're not going to hurt yourself. There you go. There you go. Let's see here. All right, let's do one more. We're getting to the end of this segment here. Charlie Dodd says, could you comment on the Greek travel writer Pausanias and the influence he has had on our interpretation of ancient Greece? None. He's had none. He's fairly interesting to read. He's not one of my favorite classical authors. Penguin did a 2-volume English language translation. But he has no effect on our interpretation of ancient Greece now. Nobody knows what ancient Greece is. Nobody reads Pausanias now in any kind of edition. I would love to live in that world, but we don't. Nobody cares at all. You got to remember, the number of dedicated book readers in the world is, in my opinion, extremely small. Extremely small. No matter what Gallup polls say, I don't think the number tops 1 million out of 8 billion. So I don't think it has any effect at all. But we're gonna stop with Pausanias and we'll move on.